Hi everyone, welcome. Come on in. We'll be with you in a sec. You're on mute, Lillian. We can't hear you yet.
Okay, perfect. Can you hear me now? Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, all good, all good.
We'll be starting briefly. Okay, while we wait for the rest of the teachers to join us in today's session, I'm going to really appreciate if you can write down. We always talk about our countries, but this time I'm a bit more interested in your traditional dish that you have. For example, in Puebla, this is the place where I'm from, they're very famous for a mole poblano. It's a dish based on chocolates. So what kind of food do you like? What is your favorite traditional dish back at home? Okay, I cannot pronounce that one, but sounds good. Lasagna, excellent. Rabbit, excellent. Ravioli. Okay, now I have to Google loads of dishes because I'm in the blue, whereas I don't know many of them. Okay, so are you ready to start with today's session? I know I'm psyched. I hope you are as well. Just a couple more minutes for the rest of the attendees to show up. Excellent. So I guess when we were talking about food, it's the never-ending conversation. We all have a fascination, an innate fascination for food. From Uruguay, from Ukraine. Couscous, I know couscous, that's a really good one. Like side dish. Greetings from Argentina, Poland, Brazil, Uruguay. Excellent. India. Okay, I have it's 2 to 9. So I'm going to start sharing my screen with all of you, giving you bits of information of today's session. So welcome everyone to Globals Festival. Today is day 3 of this Globals Festival. If you just happen to pop in today, it's an ongoing sequence of talks, of academic talks, of well-known authors around the world. So if you registered in for today, make sure to register into for the rest of the talks. You will find them very surprising. They're with a variety of topics, all the way from teaching kids to teaching juniors and adolescents. I have more greetings from Philippines, from Botswana, from Lithuania. Excellent. So this is just more or less a glimpse of what we're going to be seeing and listening to for the next couple of weeks. So make sure you register, and that way you can see and listen to all our academic talks. Before we continue, I would like for you to scan this QR code to subscribe to hear about future events. All you have to do is take out your phone and scan the QR code. The complete program of the Global Festival will be there. You will be seeing the names of the authors, the speakers, the biodatas, all the information that is necessary for you to know before looking into one of these talks. So don't forget to check the QR code so you can register for more of our festival in the Global Festival. Okay, so let's give it a go. I hope you're all ready. You all have coffee next to you. I know I have, depending on the time of day that you are at, but coffee is anytime's coffee time. Okay, in your upcoming email, you will receive the certificate of attendance, not necessarily 24 hours later. Give it a week, at least a week for it to go into your inbox. Okay, this is really important. So which email are they going to be sending you the certificate to? The same email that you used in order to register. Okay, and along with the certificate comes a goodie bag. This depends on the talk, but the goodie bags are going to be extra materials that you can use in your classes that speak a little bit about the session that we just had. And the most amazing thing, you can watch recordings and you can download presentations just in case you missed a bit because you have to go to the bathroom or anything. Make sure that you get your certificate will arrive within a week, as well as the goodie bag, the virtual goodie bag. Okay, before I introduce our first speaker, Ethan Mansur, I'd like to tell you a couple of things before we start talking to him. You can leave the questions, you can write the questions down in the question and answer part, or you can actually wait for the last 5 minutes of the session so we can speak with him about his questions, your questions. So day 4, today's Thursday the 16th, we're going to be talking with Ethan Mansur about promoting positive washback. And then last but not least, we're going to finding lifelines of reflection in Shakespeare with father and son, Ben and David Crystal. Okay, so let me give you a short introduction of Ethan. Many of you already know Ethan. He's a very well-recognized author, and he is a teacher he's based in Madrid. Recent publications include, obviously, our award winners, Ready for First and Ready for Advanced, which are my favorite books, and as well as the resource book for activities for mediation, which this year won the British Council ELTON's Award for Innovation. So a word round of applause.
Thank you, Lillian.
For Ethan. So Ethan, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that nice introduction. So if you stop sharing, I can share mine. There we go. Just give me a moment to get my slides up here. All right. Okay, and I'm just going to get my chat box been running here. Okay. All right, I'm ready. So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. If you guys are just coming in, my name is Ethan, and today's session is going to be about something called washback, which is related to testing. So we'll be sort of talking about testing in general. And just to get us started thinking about tests, I thought we could do something in the chat box to get ourselves warmed up with this topic. And my question for you to answer in the chat box is, can tests increase motivation? So I'm talking about both teachers and students. So you can just give me a yes or a no in the chat box. Getting both yeses and nos. I'm getting some sometimes or it depends. Okay, great. So for those of you that said yes, I'm curious, can you give me a specific example of that in practice? Like what would increase motivation, sort of, how would that look in the classroom? Either a teacher or a student, can you give me a specific example of that? Yes, having a clear goal, I like that, and be able to sort of have a clear objective, something to aim for. Somebody saying competition, that's probably true as well. Being maybe a little bit better than a classmate. Hopefully that's not the most important motivation for students. But yeah, feedback, for example, yes, students might get motivated by getting some feedback on their performance, for example. So my next question is, can tests improve language learning? Basically, can they help students learn more, learn better? So you can say yes or no in the chat box. Lots of yeses for this one, I think. Somebody says not sure, that's fine. Yeah, there are no right or wrong answers to these questions, by the way. Yeah. Just tell me what you really think. Okay, some people are saying sometimes, yes or no. So can someone give me an example of that? So can you give me an example of how a test might actually make students learn more or learn better? Anybody have a specific example for me? Like somebody saying something about a diagnostic tool, that a test can be a diagnostic tool, basically telling you about students' strengths and weaknesses, which is very good for students to be aware of, and teachers, of course, as well. That was a good one. A couple more questions. Can tests improve language teaching? So can they make teachers better teachers, more effective teachers? What do you think about that one? People are saying yes. Okay, lots of yeses for this one. Great. And can someone tell me how could a test actually improve a teacher's performance, help them actually become a better teacher? Can someone give me a specific example of that? They can guide the teacher. I like that. Yes, I think that sometimes assessment, particularly sort of if you're looking at the assessment criteria, for example, that could actually help guide your feedback. I'll be talking about that a bit later, in fact. Makes you sort of makes you reflect on your own teaching. I think that's probably true, particularly when you have a clear objective and sort of if you're sort of not reaching that as fast as you want to, it might actually lead to some reflection for sure. And my last question is, can tests provide life-changing outcomes for students? So you can say yes or no for that one. Somebody said yes, 100%. Yeah, somebody mentioned IELTS, for example. Yeah, that would be a great example. When people take IELTS, it's usually because they want to study abroad or they want to get a visa. Those are great examples. Getting into university, maybe getting a job. I think we can probably all agree that there's definitely some life-changing outcomes for students if an exam is sort of big enough and important enough, for sure. All right, guys, well, thanks for that. So basically what we've just been talking about is called washback, which is the effect of tests on teaching and learning. That's basically what it is. And I think based on your responses, I think we can probably all agree that the washback is a real thing. That tests do affect how we teach and they affect how students learn. So just give you a slightly more academic kind of version of that definition. This comes from Mazik, Samuel Mazik, who is an important figure in sort of language testing. Just give you a moment to read that. So, so basically, this talk is going to focus on basically how we can promote learning with tests, sort of around tests, preparing students for tests, or sort of having tests as being part of our teaching experience, and how we can sort of limit the negative factors that might actually inhibit language learning as well. And yeah, I just wanted to say from the beginning that there's a very interesting conversation to be had about sort of how much students are being tested and sort of what types of tests they're taking. But I'm going to kind of start from the place like that we're basically stuck with exams, that we kind of have to make the best of them, and that unfortunately the decisions about who, sort of the people who decide who's going to take what exam are not really usually be able to taken by teachers. And so I think that, at least for me as a teacher, I'm sort of starting from the place that my students do have to take some of these exams, and I'm going to try to get as much sort of language learning out of that experience as I can. So just to get started, before we talk about kind of practical ways of putting this idea of positive washback into practice in your classes, I just want to talk for a moment about some of the research that's been done into the washback effect. So the first one I want to share with you is that high stakes exams create stronger washback than lower stakes ones. And I think that's sort of intuitively true, right? An exam like IELTS is definitely going to affect students' learning and affect students, teachers' teaching much more than, for example, a classroom quiz. And the second one is that in sort of the literature, there's sort of a clear indication that there's a lot stronger washback on materials than on teaching methodology. So sort of exam boards and ministries of education, people that make this kind of decision, they can influence the content, sort of what we teach, but how we teach is definitely very much up to us most of the time. And the next finding I wanted to talk about is related to this, is that different teachers will teach to the same test in very different ways. So just because a whole lot of teachers out there are preparing their students for the Cambridge exams or for the IELTS exam, doesn't mean that they're all going to be preparing them in the same way. So the type of washback depends very much on the teacher. The teacher plays sort of an important role in this washback phenomenon. And the final one I want to share with you is that they've found both positive and negative washback. I think we often think of the impact of testing on our teaching and our students' learning as being negative. However, there's actually quite a lot of evidence of positive washback from exams. And very interestingly, whether or not the washback is positive or negative, it actually depends a lot on the teacher and not necessarily on the test. So a very sort of professionally made, sort of well thought out exam can have negative washback, and a sort of a poorly constructed, not very well thought out exam can actually have positive washback. And the reason for that is that the teacher is basically there in the middle, sort of mediating between the test and their students. And so a good teacher can kind of turn a crappy exam into a good learning experience for their students, and sort of vice versa as well. So that's kind of the note that I wanted to finish on, is that there's that. So from the research into washback, there's a very strong feeling of kind of empowerment for teachers, that it's true that we're not in control of the content of the exam. We can't sort of decide which exams are important in our teaching context, but we can make a really big difference in our classes in terms of how much that exam affects our teaching and learning, and sort of how it affects either positively or negatively. So I have another activity for you in the chat box. It's related to positive and negative washback. So I think that, as I said before, I think that we often associate the impact of exams with negative things. For example, boredom. It can be boring and maybe repetitive sometimes to prepare for exams, both for the teachers and students. It can be frustrating if students aren't making as much progress, or if they don't pass the exam maybe the first time. And anxiety is has often been found in washback studies. Students get stressed out about exams. All of those things are not very good, and are definitely things to keep an eye on when we are preparing students for exams. They're definitely things that we need to take into consideration, because they're very common. However, there are examples of positive washback. And a very sort of widespread finding is that exams do increase motivation. Actually, I'd asked that question at the beginning, and at least in the research, there is quite a lot of evidence to support the idea that exams do make students study a bit harder. They do make them learn a little bit faster, a little bit more. So in the chat box, I want you to think of other positive examples of washback, other ways that an exam could positively affect teaching or learning, making students learn more and teachers teach better. Anybody have any ideas? I like ambition. Yes, students want to succeed, right? An exam can give you a nice feeling of success. Self-confidence. I like engagement. Yes. Time management. That's a great one. Yeah, nothing like a good exam to sort of make you sit down and really focus on how much time you have to study. Satisfaction, great one. Self-evaluation. Yes, I think an exam can make you sort of maybe sit down and think, well, actually, maybe my listening isn't quite as good as I thought it was. Maybe that's something I really need to work on. Yeah, so I think we can think of lots of different ones. The ones that I have up here on the slide, satisfaction and engagement, these come from a particular washback study related to the Cambridge exams, where basically a researcher was asking students and teachers sort of questions about their experience preparing for that exam. And at least within this study, and it's also other studies as well, that students talked about satisfaction, and teachers did too, that it was satisfying to sort of work on getting better and better, and then finally pass the exam in the case of the students, or have your students pass the exam. And that engagement was actually affected, that yes, it's true that sometimes exam preparation can get a little bit boring because it's repetitive or something. But actually, having an exam kind of ahead of you can actually be good for engagement, because if a particular classroom activity is linked to the exam and is therefore linked to this sort of long-term goal that students have, it can actually increase engagement in classes as well. Yeah, somebody's talking about sort of expectations, sort of having sort of high expectations. I think that's true too. So I have another little activity for you related to positive or negative, positive and negative washback. So I'm going to put on the screen a critical incident, which is basically a situation where some washback is happening. And I want you to read it and decide if it's positive or negative. So I'm going to break all the rules of PowerPoint and put a lot of text on the slide. However, I'm not going to read it aloud because that would be breaking yet another rule of PowerPoint. So I'm just going to put it on the screen and give you a minute to read it on your own. And then in the chat box, tell me if you think this is an example of positive or negative washback. So about 10 seconds, you can start putting in the chat box if you think it's positive or negative. So I'm getting mostly negative in the chat box. A few people said both. There are a few positives in there as well, but it seems like mostly negative. Yes, so I think we can say that there's definitely some negative backwash going on here, because this teacher, Chico, it seems like a great teacher, right? She's adapting the course book. She's trying to make her classes engaging, and she's designed an interesting assessment. However, that assessment is having some negative backwash in the sense that it's not promoting the type of speaking that she would sort of prefer her students to be practicing, which is sort of conversational, unrehearsed speech. They're basically just practicing dialogue. So you might imagine them practicing a dialogue about buying something in a store or something like that. And at least for her, that's not quite what she wanted. So I think we can call this negative backwash. But obviously she's aware of it, and she's it seems like now that she's aware of it, she's probably going to make a change in that final assessment and maybe make it more sort of conversation focused, we can probably imagine. But I think we can say there's definitely some positive washback as well, in the sense that this exam is getting students to practice their speaking. Right, we can say that's probably a good thing. It's the students are clearly taking the exam seriously and practicing the skills that are tested on the exam. So I have one more example for you. So again, I'm going to give you a minute to read it, and then in the chat box, I want you to tell me if it's positive or negative, the washback that's sort of happening in this situation. About 10 seconds, you can start putting in the chat box if you think it's positive or negative. Okay, so it seems like most people are saying positive. I like how people just put a plus sign, very efficient, clever. Right, so I think we can say there's definitely some positive washback going on here, right? The students have actually improved their language skills as a result of this test preparation that they did. I think that we can also say that there's some positive washback on teaching as well. And I think this is an interesting example of a teacher who's really sort of rising to the challenge. they're sort of creating a new type of activity. For example, I've never had my students sort of listen and type at the same time. That's a very interesting activity when you think about it, and a very useful one for students who are air traffic controllers. So, more power to this teacher. They're doing a great job. And I think that's an example of sort of how an exam can sort of challenge a teacher in a positive way, sort of make us a little bit more innovative, maybe make us rethink a little bit what we're doing in class. I think we can also say there's at least a little bit of negative backwash as well, in the sense that the students sort of failed the exam the first time because they weren't prepared for it, and that I'm sure that creates some anxiety. And obviously this training organization was not very thrilled with their results. So they might have told off the students and said, okay, go to this course. I'm sure that wasn't a very nice experience. So obviously exams can have positive and negative washback. But basically the point I'm trying to make here is that within all of our contexts, our students are taking exams. I'm sure that's probably true of all of us. And I think taking a moment and thinking about how those exams are affecting our teaching and the students' learning, either positive or negatively, can be a good reflection exercise, and one that I would encourage you to do. So leading on from that, we're going to talk about some other sort of positive ways of promoting positive washback in class, ways that we can sort of use a test to improve our teaching or improve our students' learning. So an example of this is getting to know the exam better. So this is talked about in the literature of the washback effect or washback, because the better a student and the better the teacher knows the exam, the better, because that means that the students and the teacher can really focus on the language and the skills that are actually tested on the exam, and they're not sort of wasting their time with things that aren't tested, or practicing things that they don't sort of need to be practicing. For example, if the students have to write a letter on an exam, they shouldn't spend a lot of time writing an essay. It would be much better to sort of spend their time practicing a letter, because that's what they're going to be assessed on, that kind of thing. And also, students kind of look to us to be kind of experts on the exams that we prepare them for, sort of fairly or unfairly. But we should sort of know the exam back and front, ideally. And a good place to start with that are the sort of the handbooks that are published by exam boards. So not all exams are sort of big enough to have this kind of thing. However, a lot of exams that you're probably familiar with do have this type of useful handbook. Trinity has one, for example, IELTS has them, and TOEFL, and on and on. If an exam board is sort of a good one, they're usually trying to be transparent about what's on their exam, because they're very aware of washback, and they're trying to promote positive washback by telling teachers basically what's on the test, and giving them some idea of how to help students develop the skills and the language that are tested on that particular exam. And just as a side note, I was going to mention that I'm an official speaking examiner for 3 of these exam boards. And the actual information they give me as sort of an official speaking examiner is not really that different than the information that's available in these books. So they're not keeping a lot hidden, really. It's all out there in the open. So it's definitely worth spending some time looking at these resources and referring back to them too if you're not sure about something. If you're just, maybe students ask you a question and you're not sure. Another great place to learn more about the exam, get more familiar with it, is an actual exam preparation book. So if exam is big enough, like the Cambridge exams, there'll be specific books that have been written to help students prepare for them. A good example of that is the Ready For series from Macmillan, which prepares students for the B2 first and the C1 exam, C1 advanced exams. And I think that a good preparation book like this one, the authors have done a great job of sort of pinpointing exactly what information about the exam a student really needs kind of at the moment of need, if you know what I mean. So instead of sort of reading through a whole reference about the exam, students are just getting kind of just what they need right when they need it. And I think that's a nice way of sort of drip feeding kind of this information about the exam that they need to know. And it's good for teachers as well that are less familiar with the exam. So another great place to get to know the exam better. And before I move on to another topic, I just wanted to give you a specific example of how knowing the exam well actually can maybe make you a better teacher or improve your instruction. So this is a personal example. So basically, I've been a teacher for a long time, but at the beginning, I didn't prepare students for this type of Cambridge exam or any official exam. But I was giving my students writing assignments. I was asking them to write things and then giving them feedback. But back then I was really just giving them feedback on their language, on their grammar, vocabulary, basically correcting their mistakes, which is something, we should be doing as teachers, of course. But if you really want to help students get better at writing, just correcting their grammar mistakes is sort of not enough, right? We need to be thinking about content, about the information that they're passing on. Is it sort of the correct information? Is it what was asked of them? Thinking about things like communicative achievement, how clearly are the students explaining things? Are they using the right genre features of the piece of writing? Is it well organized? Is it sort of chaotic? Are they sort of using supporting examples and reasons effectively? All of those things are important when you're giving students feedback on writing. And that's one thing I learned from preparing students for the Cambridge exams. I think the feedback on writing, even if it's writing that a student gives me in a sort of a general English course, is much better now than it was before I started preparing students for this particular exam. So I think that if we take an exam seriously, I think there's quite a bit to be learned from examinations like this one, particularly if you're paying attention to sort of how it's assessed and thinking about sort of why are they placing so much importance on something like organization. So the next thing I want to talk about is learning opportunities. So exams and tests of any kind, one thing they're really good at is telling us sort of where our students are doing well and where they could be doing better, basically. And I think in sort of class, anytime we give students a test, there's sort of this sort of a tendency, unfortunately, to just kind of check the test, check the answers and give students a mark and kind of move on because we're all busy, I know. But we need to be sort of thinking about how we can use the information that we get from tests in a formative way. So our tests kind of inform us about how our students are performing. And they can help us be better teachers in the sense that they can help us sort of focus on what's most important, what our students need to be getting better at. So for example, if there was some particular grammar on a test that most of the students had trouble with, well, that's something that maybe is worth returning to and reviewing in a future lesson. So I wanted to give you a couple specific examples for a very specific exam task. This is one called a multiple choice closed task. It's from the B2 first exam, Cambridge exam. And yeah, it's sort of a typical exam task, right? You have it's a multiple choice one. You have to choose the right word that's missing from the text. And I think an exam task like this, it's a great example of how you really can get some learning out of an exam test like this, because it's going to tell you specifically which words the students don't know or don't know well enough to choose the right answer. So usually when you do a test like this, there's sort of 3 or 4 that, a lot of the students had trouble with, and that can be kind of a learning aim that sort of comes right out of that task. And it's something that you can teach the students because the exam test has basically told you exactly what they didn't know yet. Another nice sort of learning opportunity that can come out of this is sort of investigating the right answers. So instead of just checking the task and moving on, sort of spending some time on the answers, think, well, why? So for example, in the example here, letter C is the correct answer for the exam offers. So looking at that and saying, well, why is that the right answer? Is it because it's the meaning of the word? Is it because there's a preposition that follows it? Also thinking about some of the wrong answers. Why are the wrong answers wrong? Well, this one, yeah, the meaning is sort of not quite right, or this one doesn't fit with the context, that kind of thing. And another sort of one related to wrong answers is a nice kind of productive task that you can add to a receptive exam task like this one is getting students to actually take one of the wrong answers and then rewrite the section of the text that it comes from to make that wrong answer right. So you're giving students practice not only with sort of the correct language in this context, but also with language that wasn't correct but could be correct in another context. That's a nice way of sort of adding some learning to an exam task. And finally, I think that it's worth saying that we're not just language teachers. Our students learn lots of things from us, and they can learn more about the topic. For example, if we give them a few minutes to look up some information on their phone, or if we bring in a video for them to watch, try to get them a little bit more interested in, for example, Seville, a nice city here in Spain where I live. And I find that when you do this kind of thing, students actually end up kind of referring back to the original text, and they sort of end up kind of recycling some of the language from that text. So it can actually be an indirect way of kind of getting students to engage a little bit more with the vocabulary that's being tested in this type of topic. So those are just some kind of a few ideas for one specific exam task, but I think you'll find that this type of activity can be applied to almost any kind of receptive exam task, like any kind of listening or reading or grammar vocabulary exercise. It's not too hard when you start thinking about sort of spending how to get some learning out of each one of those tasks and make sure that you're not just testing, but you're teaching as well. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, I think I still have time, yes, is transferable skills. So these get talked a lot about nowadays in sort of general education, but also within ELT. We're talking about sort of 21st century skills or global skills, sort of whatever you choose to call them. But they're skills that apply to the classroom, but also are useful sort of outside of the classroom in everyday life, in our sort of professional or academic lives specifically. A good example of that is study habits, sort of organizing your time, maybe thinking about doing something in a quiet place where you can concentrate, or setting aside time to study. Things like that are sort of transferable skills. An exam preparation class can kind of be good practice for that kind of time organization type of skills. So I want you to get in the chat box. I'd like you to think of some other examples of transferable skills or 21st century skills or that kind of thing that you think would apply to exam preparation that would be useful in that context, but would also be useful outside of the classroom in sort of academic or professional life. So people are talking about stress management, teamwork. I like that one. Critical thinking, yeah, interestingly, critical thinking comes into exams quite a lot, particularly at higher levels. Students are asked to, for example, decide what the purpose of a text is, or what the sort of underlying message is. Things like that involve critical thinking. Collaboration, yes, yeah. So, for example, if students have to do a speaking task together, that requires definitely some cooperation. Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat here. Lots of nice ideas. Planning, I like that one, right? Things usually go better if you plan them. And that's not just true of writing activities, right? Like actually planning out, for example, a presentation that you might be giving at your workplace. If you sort of spend some time brainstorming and then sort of planning out what you're going to do, it's going to come out much better. So just some examples that some things that I think about in my classes, for example, learning from mistakes. So not just kind of getting the mark or not just getting some writing back, but actually sort of engaging with it, trying to learn from your mistakes so you don't make them again. Setting goals, for example, I think exam preparation is a great place to talk about goal setting, not just long-term goals like passing in the exam, but shorter-term goals that you can sort of look forward to meeting along the way and sort of will show you progress. And finally, stress management. Many of you mentioned stress management. I think an exam preparation course is a good place to talk about that. And I think it's something we should be talking about with students because it's very common for students to feel stressed about an important exam, and talking about sort of some ways of dealing with that stress. Because stress doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? A little bit of stress is okay. It sort of improves our performance. But if stress isn't managed, it can sort of slip into panic or anxiety, which are obviously going to have negative effects on our students' performance and just their personal well-being. So that's kind of the end of the chat this talk. So just to run through the takeaways, we talked about washback, this sort of theoretical concept from language testing. And we talked about some research that's been done into it. We talked about examples of positive and negative washback. And we also talked about some ways that we as teachers can promote positive washback in our classes, and also try to limit some of that negative washback that's perhaps inevitable from testing. And we talked about that knowing the exam well can be a good way of promoting positive washback, as well as learning opportunities, trying to find as many of those as we can. And also thinking about some of those transferable skills that are useful in exam preparation, but also very useful in our lives outside the classroom. So I just want to finish quickly with a reflection activity. In the chat box, I'd like you just to put in any idea or activity from this webinar that you found particularly useful, that you think is going to stick with you, and that you might think about putting into practice in your classroom, or you think that maybe you'll be keeping in mind maybe this week when you go back to class. Somebody said knowing the exam better. Yeah, I think you can never know these exams quite well enough. I think there's always little surprises in there, so it's always, yeah, using, and you can get a lot of that information from those handbooks that I mentioned. They're invaluable resources for students and teachers. Yeah, giving clear feedback, somebody mentioned. Yeah, trying to squeeze some additional learning out of exam tasks. Yes, we definitely want to be looking to do as much teaching as possible in any kind of teaching context, even if we're focusing on an exam. Somebody liked make the wrong answer right. Somebody liked that one. Okay, so it looks like many of you got many things out of this session, so that makes me feel good. And yes, you've been a great audience. Thank you for all the participation. That's always makes these things much more enjoyable for everybody. So thanks for that. So Lillian, if you want to come on, I don't know if there was any questions. I'm sure there were, in fact, questions that I didn't answer because
the first one, Nathan.
there are so many participants
I
couldn't manage to.
What is washback in simple terms? That's from Shoshore Shamizu.
So a definition of washback in simple terms.
Yes.
So basically, washback is the effect of a test or testing in general on teaching and learning. That's
okay, perfect.
Washback in a nutshell.
A question for Ethan. What can teachers do when education policies force us to elude, quit, test? This what has been happening in Argentina for the last 4 or 5 years. No more exam boards, no more tests, for example. I think this is terrible, but we are forced to evaluate students in their own ways.
Say that just one more time. So I didn't quite understand. So is there been a new exam that's been introduced? Is that what's going on?
I believe they've been banning exams lately in Argentina.
Banning exams. Oh, that's interesting. I have to say I don't have a good answer for that one. That sounds like a sort of a local issue. But I will say that in the literature of washback, they do actually often mention politics as being very important in testing. That a lot of decisions about testing aren't really made by teachers or even educators. They're often made by people in sort of higher up positions in the government and things like that. And that politics actually has a lot to do with what exams ended up being approved and so on and so forth. So I don't think that's just a problem in Argentina. I assume that's a problem in many places.
Thank you, Ethan. I've got 2 more. Please suggest some activity books or websites helpful in planning out for a classroom.
So I don't mean to make you repeat things. I just didn't quite understand. Just one more time. Maybe I just need to turn up my volume. There we go. Go ahead.
Please suggest some activity books or websites helpful in planning out for a classroom.
So for like classroom planning, sort of planning lessons. Okay, so there's some great methodology books out there that I'm sure many people are aware of. The ones that I really like are by somebody named Jim Scrivener, who has written lots of different things, but there's some great ones. One that's called Teaching English Grammar, for example, it's a Macmillan methodology title that I think is particularly good for teaching grammar in particular. But I think he's just got Jim Scrivener's got a great handle on planning classes and sort of how to make the most out of the students in the room and involving them in sort of the lesson that you plan. So I think anything by Jim Scrivener, I think, would be a good place to start with that.
Okay, last but not least, do you have any specific tips for preparing students for young learner exams? Starters, movers, and flyers.
Yes. So I have to say, I'm not very familiar with those exams. I'm not an examiner for them, and I haven't spent that much time preparing students for them. So I think that question would be better answered by one of the other speakers. We have some nice speakers that are talking about younger learners. I think they'd be much better qualified to answer that question than me. I've mostly worked with teenagers and adults when it comes to preparing students for exams.
Well, it was a real pleasure, Nathan. Ethan, I don't believe I speak for myself. I speak for everyone here. It's been amazing listening to your tips, the strategies, how to deal with all these situations in our classroom. So thank you very much for lending us a bit of your morning and of your minds to enlighten the path for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lillian, and thank you to everybody again for your participation. You've been a great audience. Best of luck.
Thank you. Now I'm going to start sharing my screen. Here we go. There we go. One second. I'm doing this transition as easy as possible. Here we go. Okay, so Ethan was telling us about the series of Ready For. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper into it. It provides in-depth exam training. Not only is it going to be covering the competency, speaking, listening, reading, writing, use of English, it will prepare students to self-prepare for exams. It will come with tips and strategies in order for students to attack their own readings and their own writings, offer systematic development of all 4 language skills. This is, in one book, you will find the 4 skills in an integrated way, and they're going to be matched up. Listening will pair communicative competence and reading with writing. Makes exam preparation a positive and meaningful experience for students. It doesn't have to be dreadful. Every time I remember back at seeing my students preparing for an exam, oh, it's so tedious. It doesn't have to be tedious. It can be very gratifying and very interesting for them as well. Okay, I'm leaving more there, a link so you can see more material for Ready For. Give me 1 second, changing my slide. Now, before we continue, this is really important. If you are interested in getting more material on the series of Ready For, in the chat box, I'm copying the link. All you have to do is click and register in this link. Okay, thank you very much. There's a link already. So you can contact your local sales representatives and feel free to scan the QR code so you can receive more information about the series of Ready For. Okay. Now, this is our second moment. We have on one side, we have the Crystal father and son, Ben and David Crystal, talking about finding lifelines of reflection in Shakespeare. Or option 2, you can go to a showcase on Ready For 4th edition. Okay, so if you stay in the room, we will stay with Ben and David Crystal. And if you swap rooms, you will be seeing a showcase. So while you decide in which room you stay in, which room you go to, let me tell you a little bit about Ben and David Crystal. Okay, Ben is a professor in honor, is an honorary professor of linguistics at Bangor, and works as a North Wales writer, lecturer, broadcaster, and editor. Ben Crystal is also an actor, author, producer, educator, and explorer based in Wales. Okay, so teachers, go to the link that you prefer to see. There you go. All you have to do is click on the link if you want to go to the showcase, or you can stay here to watch Ben and David Crystal. David Crystal, the floor is all yours.
All right, be with you in a moment.
Hi there. Hi Lillian, thanks so
Hello.
much. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm just struggling here to leave the full screen. Hang on, we will be right back.
Remember, there's a link in the chat box if you want to see the Ready for showcase.
Yay, we are here. We are ready. Hi, everybody.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. A few little problems with Zoom. All right, Lillian, thank you for the kind introduction. Are we ready to go?
Yes, ready to go.
All right, we'll see you later.
Yeah, right.
You can turn your camera off when you want.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, well,
So-
hey, everybody.
Mm.
What ho, peace here, grace and good company to everyone.
Yes, how many goodly creatures are there here? How beauteous mankind is.
Dad, you can't see them at all. We're online. They can see us, but
Oh, this is a new technology that's coming in these days. Oh, look, I'm imagining anyone who tunes into this talk must, by definition, be beauteous.
well, that I can completely agree with. That
Yeah.
is true. Now, we have both greeted you with some lines from Shakespeare. Now, the first one that I spoke, what ho, peace here, grace and good company, that was from Measure for Measure, when Isabella greets everybody.
And the second one, the one I used, about beauteous mankind and so on, that was from The Tempest, when Miranda, she's the daughter of Prospero on the island, she sees a group of men for the first time, and she's just amazed. How many goodly creatures are there here?
Now, you can use some Shakespeare lines too in your everyday life. Imagine that you're arriving at a party and you can say, what ho, peace here, grace and good company. It's a lot better than good evening, nice to see you.
Yeah, boring. Good evening, nice to... Oh, no, yours is much better. Yours is better.
Shakespeare's.
Well, Shakespeare's, yes. I think everyone also would be rather pleased if they were all called beauteous, you know.
That's true.
And then you could tell them that you're quoting Shakespeare and they will all be hugely impressed with you.
Now, Dad and I have just written a book about this sort of thing, which will be out in a couple of months. The book is coming out in May. It's called Everyday Shakespeare. Everyday Shakespeare. And its subtitle is Lines for Life.
Yes, and that's the key. That's the key. Lines for everyday life. You see, what we did was we went through all the plays and all the poems that Shakespeare wrote, and we pulled out some of the best lines that he wrote that apply to our daily lives, and then chose one for every day of the year.
And there is something in Shakespeare for any occasion, really and truly. And we've just used two that you could use for arriving at a gathering of any kind. But we can look at some others. Like what happens, what Shakespeare line could you use if you're just meeting one person?
Well, you could just say, you know, nice to see you or something. It's a bit dull though, isn't it? Really?
I suppose it's a bit, but what about this one? It gives me wonder, great as my content, to see you here before me.
Yes, yeah, it gives me wonder, absolutely.
And Othello says that when he sees his wife Desdemona after a dangerous sea voyage. But you see what we're doing? We're using lines that you won't really have noticed before. They're not the famous Shakespeare quotes.
Like, is this a dagger that I see before me, or something like that?
A horse, my kingdom for a horse.
Yeah, great lines. They're great lines, aren't they? But they're not very relevant to everyday life, at least not unless you see daggers regularly, do you?
Or if you've lost your horse.
If you lost your horse.
Why the long face?
Oh dear, no. Now, the quotes in our book and the ones we're going to talk about in a minute or two are lines that relate to situations we often find ourselves in, not like looking for horses, you know, although you might, who knows. They show that Shakespeare is relevant to all of us, old, young, adults were at work, family, kids in classrooms, and also that he isn't as difficult as people think he is.
And that's especially important when presenting Shakespeare to the younger generations. I had this experience, and I imagine many of you out there might have had too, that it can be quite off-putting to see a play, not on stage, but in a book, surrounded by lots and lots and lots of explanatory notes. Because if there are lots of notes, the notes themselves give you the impression that the play is difficult.
Hey, yeah, I've got one here, Ben.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a copy of Hamlet, and you open it up at any given page, and I mean, have a look at that.
So wait a second. This from here to here is the play, and from here to here are all the notes.
Yeah.
And that's true for pretty much every page. So even subconsciously, you're being told this is difficult. You need help and understanding to get to Shakespeare. And it is true that there are some bits of Shakespeare that we do need some help with. But there is what we've learned in making this book, Everyday Shakespeare, is that there is so much in Shakespeare that needs no explanation at all.
Yeah, so that's the idea. You see, we went through all the plays, as I say, and all the poems. We pulled out the ones that we thought were really every day.
And also the ones that show Shakespeare using language, the English language, in a really brilliant way.
And we're amazed. I mean, we were amazed at how often we found ourselves dropping these quotes into our everyday conversation. Let me try and think of one.
Look, he's winding up the watch of his wit. By and by, it will strike.
Bong. Yes, that's from The Tempest, when one of the nobles pokes fun at the old councillor Gonzalo. He's winding up the watch of his wit. But I've got a good riposte to that, Ben. Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast.
Oh, that's such a great quote. Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast. That's from Romeo and Juliet, when the friar tells Romeo not to be in such a hurry to go off and marry Juliet. And, you can say that line, wisely and slow, they stumble and run fast, to anyone that you see that's rushing about and is in a hurry. We might say today, more haste, less speed. But it's a good one for anyone rushing in or out of your classroom.
Yes, that's right. Classrooms, indeed, home, family, anywhere, shops. We said for any occasion. And that includes the unusual occasions, like the pandemic, for instance. I mean, what could Shakespeare say about the pandemic, Ben?
Well, he was familiar with pandemics. Back in Shakespeare's day, they called them plagues. And we know that over the course of Shakespeare's time in London, the plague visited the city 4 or perhaps even 5 times, depending on when you think Shakespeare arrived in London. And, at one point, the city, the theatres were closed for 2 years. So we've had a taste of that in the last couple of years. And when we were allowed to meet up again after lockdown, we all felt very cautious. And what could you say to someone to welcome someone into your, hopefully, infection-free home?
What would I say? I would say what King Leontes says in The Winter's Tale. He talks to Florizel and Perdita when they arrive in his country, and he says, "The blessed gods purge all infection from our air, whilst you do climate here."
The blessed gods purge all infection from our air, whilst you do climate here. Whilst you live here, I suppose.
While you stay in our climate, yes, while you're with us.
That's lovely. And then what happens if you caught COVID? Well, here are a couple of lines from The Rape of Lucrece that can help. "It easeth some, though none it ever cured, to think their dollar others have endured."
Yes, that's so true. Dollar, some people pronounce it dollar. We use the old pronunciation a lot.
The French still have that word.
French still do.
It means pain, doesn't it?
D-O-L-O-U-R. D-O-L-O-U-R.
"It easeth some, though none it ever cured, to think one's dollar, one's pain, others have endured."
Yeah.
We might say misery loves company.
Yeah, that's right. Hearing about other people's illness always helps a bit, doesn't it? Absolutely.
And then the uncertainty of it all. These lines from King John that I'm about to say are in the play. They're about a political situation, but they capture well the confusion that certainly we all felt in 2020 when the guidelines were changing and the understanding of how COVID worked changed and lots of rumors were being spread around. As I traveled hither through the land, I find the people strangely fantasized, possessed with rumors, full of idle dreams, not knowing what they fear, but full of fear.
Oh, isn't that so appropriate for COVID? I mean, not knowing what they fear, but full of fear.
Full of fear. Yeah, that
absolutely perfect summary of it all. Shakespeare knew, yeah. And then he talks about politics. Oh gosh, that's another area Shakespeare was especially good at, talking about political leaders, unpopular decisions, mutual suspicion among politicians and so on. Oh, and of course, the dangers once you do get into a position of power.
Yes, must be very tricky to be wielding the direction of a state. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown.
Oh, yes, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. Yeah, that's from Henry IV, Part 2. Perfect, of course, for a country. I suppose there might be some that changes its leaders every few months.
Oh, I don't know which country you're thinking about.
Oh, can't imagine.
It's not Wales, anyway.
Oh, dear. But what about this one? From the Lucrece poem again, about any unpopular decision maker. Why should the private pleasure of some one become the public plague of many more?
Why should one person's likes affect the likes of thousands of others?
Yes,
thing, yeah.
exactly. Just because you're a minister or something or other.
Doesn't mean you can. All sorts of.
We voted them in.
Oh, apparently I didn't. How about this one from Orlando in As You Like It, when he praises his servant Adam for not being like other people? The fashion of these times, where none will sweat but for promotion.
Oh, yes.
The idea that we could work for each other without gaining for ourselves.
Yeah, working for others. Yes, yeah. We're here to do benefits, as Shakespeare says somewhere else. And we love this one from Pericles. 'Tis time to fear when tyrants seem to kiss. Ooh,
that's good.
Yeah.
It's time to fear when tyrants seem to kiss, and not just kissing like politicians kissing babies, but when people are apparently being nice to
each other,
wanting to kiss. It's time to fear. But back to the non-political side of everyday life. That's the great thing about Shakespeare, and we themed every month in our book to a different ideas. So it's not just politics, but there's life and love and insults and grief and work and play, as well as politics. So tell me, what sort of person are you if you're going to catch a train? Do you turn up a few minutes before the train leaves, or do you turn up 3 hours before the train leaves? I know which one I am. I turn up a few minutes before the train leaves. Dad very much turns up in time to catch the previous train.
Or the one before that.
Or the one before that. But Shakespeare says it beautifully, as far as Dad's concerned. Better 3 hours too soon than a minute too late.
Absolutely. Perfect summary. Absolutely. Learn from that bit.
I am better a minute too late than 3 hours too soon. But that quote is from Ford, Master Ford, in The Merry Wives of Windsor. Another play that's full of beautiful lines like this, but very few people ever go and see or read. And Ford, anxious to get back to his house in time to catch Falstaff trying to have an affair with his wife.
Yes, well, here we are. 3 hours too soon, but we're on time at the moment. So, but say you've just been talking about someone. Here's another example, a very everyday situation. You've just been talking about someone, and then they show up. Huh? What? Your worship was the last man in our mouths.
Or woman.
Oh, woman, yes.
Your worship was the last woman in our mouths. My goodness, you're here. We've just been talking about you. The number of times I come to visit my parents and one or other of them will say that as I've just arrived. They've just been talking about me.
Yeah, we've just been complaining about you.
Well,
actually.
or complaining about
Probably,
me. Yeah, probably.
Absolutely.
But your worship was the last man in our mouths. That's Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. When the merchant Antonio turns up and they've just been talking about him. This happens so often.
Yeah. And here's another situation. What do you say if you're feeling confused about something or uncertain? What would I say? I'd say sort of, oh, I'm muddled, or oh, I'm just confused, or something like that.
Or maybe you say you're lost.
Oh, lost. Yes, that's right. But this one's better, isn't it? Listen to this. My thoughts are whirled like a potter's wheel. I know not where I am, nor what I do.
Lovely.
Yeah, I'm completely
spun around like you're on a potter's wheel.
That's right. That's from Henry VI, Part 1. Poor General Talbot has just been taken aback by meeting Joan La Pucelle, the great French woman who's going to save the country, and he says, I don't know what to do about this. My thoughts are whirled like a potter's wheel.
I love that. I don't know where I am or what to do. It's like getting off one of those children's merry-go-round things, and you're all
Yes,
busy.
that's right.
You could try this one. When a situation gets so out of hand, you've no idea what to do about it. You try and solve it. You talk to friends, and at the end of the day, you realize that all you can do is wait for time to pass. That time heals all, as they say. Oh, time, says Viola in Twelfth Night, thou must untangle this, not I. It is too hard a knot for me to untie.
Yes.
Time, you must untangle this. I can't do it.
Yeah, that's right. And time does, of course, in the play.
Absolutely.
And she has a happy ending. Yeah, very good. Right. So, all occasions, we
It
said.
did.
That means, of course, that we can be rude as well as being polite and nice.
There's many a man hath more hair than wit.
What? Thank you, Ben. Yeah, he's referring, I suppose, to my beard.
And am I referring to your sense of humor or your knowledge, sir?
Oh, well, wit here means intelligence.
Ah.
Yeah, so you're basically saying I've got more hair than intelligence.
You're hairier than you are clever.
Yeah, that's right. But
That's
listen, don't knock my beard. People are very happy with my beard. When I used to go into schools, the kids would say, "Here comes Gandalf," for instance, or "Here comes Dumbledore." You know, all these famous characters from fiction, or Santa Claus.
Yeah, someone in the chat this morning said Santa Claus when they saw Chad for the first time.
Anyway, yes, many a man hath more hair than wit. That's from the Comedy of Errors. So I have to fight back now, don't I?
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna choose Thersites from Troilus and Cressida. He's a kind of soldier that travels around, and he criticizes one of the leaders of the Greeks, Ajax. Thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbows.
That's a terrific one. All right, what about this from Timon of Athens? As much foolery as I have, so much wit thou lackst.
Right, okay, I'll give you in return Horatio from Hamlet. Ben, these are but wild and whirling words.
This is such a great exercise that you all can do in your classroom. You can go online after this talk, of course, and if you Google the Shakespeare insult kit, it's a lovely tool that someone invented a while ago. There's 3 columns. You're invited to say thou, which means you, and then you pick a word from each column, and you can just get the kids to ping pong back and forth playfully and safely and kindly these wonderful, beautiful words of insult to each other. But you can also be nice to each other in Shakespeare too.
Oh, okay. So I've got to be nice to you.
Well, you can try.
Okay, I'll do my best. Here's one from The Merchant of Venice. I never knew so young a body with so old a head. Oh,
That's all right. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I think that's nice. Unless you're talking about my wrinkles, or
no.
Here's one from the Sonnets. A decrepit father takes delight to see his active child do deeds of youth.
Decrepit? I thought we were going to be nice.
You see, Dad, in Shakespeare's time, decrepit meant...
Oh, yeah, right. No, let me tell you. My age is as a lusty winter, frosty but kindly.
It's true.
That's old Adam talking in As You Like It. I identify with that.
I hope you all are getting the point. Shakespeare offers us interesting, fun, and unusual, at least to modern ears, ways of saying really ordinary things. You can have a pretty regular, normal, everyday conversation in Shakespearean.
Yeah, sums it up, really.
Well, shall we go? No, I mean, shall we shog?
Oh, gosh. Well, it's not quite time yet. We've got several more minutes to do. Shog. Oh, shog is a great word, though. Shall we shog, says Ben. Now, that's one of Nim's favourite expressions. That's Nim, N-Y-M. Nim's favourite expressions in the Henry plays. So really, it means sort of, shall we go? Shall we get off? Should we be gone? It's a really mysterious word because nobody knows where it came from. Yeah, it's a puzzle for all of us linguists. No, we can't go yet. We mustn't forget one thing.
Is there more toil?
More toil. Oh, that's Ariel in The Tempest once again, or Ariel in The Tempest. Yes, is there more toil? Yes, Ben. There is. We've got other things to talk about. But remember what Henry Bolingbroke says in Richard II.
What does he say?
A while to work and after holiday.
Ah,
yeah.
Good line. Another good line for the classroom.
No, we need to talk about sleep. And the reason why we choose sleep to talk about today is that it's in every play. You can't read a play without somebody talking about sleeping or dreaming or nightmares or something like that.
Oh, it's true. I love this one from Cymbeline, another play that very few people have encountered. He that sleeps feels not the toothache.
Yes. Ain't that the truth?
True, isn't it? And and that's the great thing about Shakespeare too. It's not just the toothache he means that when we go to sleep, all of our troubles are forgotten for a few hours, I suppose, unless they come out in our dreams.
Yeah, indeed. But I was thinking more about how we talk to each other about sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody's just about to go to bed. What do you say to them? You say, sleep well.
Yeah, I suppose. Night, sleep well.
Sleep well, which is a bit sort of boring, I suppose, in some ways. Why not try this one from Julius Caesar? Enjoy the honey-heavy dew of slumber.
Well, that is a good one. A honey-heavy dew of slumber.
Yeah.
And it does, and slumber's a lovely word for sleep as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all very cozy, the honey-heavy dew.
Yeah. Slumber well.
Oh, yeah, slumber. That's a nice way of saying goodnight to someone.
Well, isn't it? Yeah.
What about this longer one from Macbeth that perhaps some of you might have heard before? Because Macbeth describes sleep as the thing that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, sore labour's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast.
Oh, yes. I love it all, but I love sore labour's bath. I like that one. Balm, that's B-A-L-M, balm of hurt minds. Oh, great stuff. Great
one. Sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, sore labour's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast. He comes up with 6 really great ones, and just in one speech.
One little tiny bit of a speech.
Well, there we are. Time to stop.
No, not yet. There's one more thing.
Oh, is there more toil?
Oh, yes. Look, we've got to talk about the weather.
Well, the British are very good at talking about the weather.
Well, absolutely. It's an everyday topic. If anything is, people are always talking about the weather in the plays. They really are. Especially bad weather, though. Not so much good. Like this one from King Lear. The night comes on, and the bleak winds do sorely ruffle.
That is good.
I'm feeling cold already.
Yeah.
Bleak winds do sorely ruffle.
Yeah, they don't just ruffle you.
No,
They sorely ruffle.
sorely, S-O-R-E-L-Y, sorely ruffle.
As in like a wound or a sore on your
Yes,
skin.
that's right. That's right.
What about this one? You look outside in Wales most days and see that it's started to rain. What would you say?
I'd say, oh, it's raining again, I suppose, something like that.
Boring. What about this one from Richard II? Like an unseasonable, stormy day, which makes the silver rivers drown their shores, as if the world were all dissolved to tears.
Oh,
As if when it rains, it's like the world has dissolved to tears.
absolutely. I mean, that gets right to it, doesn't it? What a lovely, lovely image. And, that's the sort of thing you can do in class.
Mhm.
You can take a line from Shakespeare like that and say, this is how Shakespeare describes the rain. How would you do it?
Mhm.
In a similarly dramatic kind of way. And we've tried this occasionally, and they come up. Little kids come up with the most wonderful thing. It's raining like as if my dolly is crying.
Oh,
I remember
bless.
one kid saying to me once, that sort of thing.
We wrote a book called The Illustrated Dictionary of Shakespeare, which is a beautiful book for students of all ages. And you can find in there a list of describing words that you can give to the students so that they have something to work off of. But of course, you can invite students to paint a picture that expresses the world dissolving to tears, or if a student is so minded or bodied, they can dance or paint an expression of it too. It doesn't have to be used with words.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you can use the weather to talk about people as well as the situation generally, as character called Vernon does in Henry IV, Part 1. He's describing Prince Hal.
Oh yeah, as full of spirit as the month of May, and gorgeous as the sun at midsummer.
Oh, it's gorgeous as the sun at midsummer. That'd be a good one to describe anybody who's full of energy and enthusiasm, and like you.
Oh, thank you, Father. Although describing someone as full of spirit as the month of May and gorgeous as the sun at midsummer, tying midsummer to May, this is Northern Hemisphere territory.
Afraid so.
The Australians might not get as nice a May month.
No, you just have to change the Shakespeare and talk about the month of December instead, or something.
Or a very different sort of spirit in May.
Yes, that's right. And anyway, one more thing.
Is there more toil?
Yeah, I'm afraid so, Ben. Look, we haven't really talked about how to use this new book of ours. It's coming out in a couple of months' time, and when people get it, there's a quotation for every day of the year. So how are people going to use it? I mean, one way I think is that the obvious way is to look at the day's quote up at, say, breakfast time, and you say, that's a nice quote for today. I think I'll try and use that today when I'm talking to somebody or visiting somewhere, or, something like that. Or if you're a teacher, you might say, I could use that at the beginning of my class, or in relation to some topic I know I'm going to talk about today. Shakespeare will sort of fit here. That'd be one way of doing it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you see, each quote has been chosen in part to be tangible or pick-upable enough so that no quote is too unmanageable to reflect on, to chew on, to say out loud, to offer to a friend, to remember, to memorize. We've even given some tips about how you might be able to memorize these little 1-2 lining quotes, or even dare to drop into daily conversation. That's in your everyday life. When it comes to the classroom, well, each page obviously has a date at the top of it, then the quote, then a little bit of commentary from us, either about what it means to us, or what a particular word means, or the linguistic history, or some other bit of fascinating idea that we found. And then at the bottom, there's a context. So where the quote would have sat or does sit in the play or poem that it came from. And you could very easily think about setting up an entire lesson plan from not just whatever quote is on today, February the 16th. You can flip through the book and find the quote that means the most to you. And that's the thing, is we've picked these quotes because we felt they struck a chord with us, and we felt that they were everyday enough. And a bit like whenever people say, how do you get into Shakespeare? And I often say, well, go to the sonnets. He wrote 154 of his sonnets, and they say, well, where on earth do we start if we're going to get into the sonnets? And I say, well, whatever you do, don't start at sonnet 1 and start reading through them sequentially, because you won't make it to the most famous sonnet, sonnet 18. But what you can do is flip through the sonnets until you find one that strikes a chord with you. And that's one way of reading or using our book too.
Yeah. And saying things out loud, Ben, isn't that absolutely crucial?
Absolutely.
That's the key. Whether you're saying it out just to yourself in front of a mirror, or to somebody in the family, or to some friend, or that's how you remember them, I think, really.
Absolutely. The I'm an actor, and of course I would say this, but these words were written to be performed. They were written. You don't have to be an actor, though, right? They were written to be spoken out loud, and ideally spoken to someone. So even getting the kids to trial just saying the words to each other, getting Shakespeare, getting your mouth and your tongue and your heart and your mind comfortable with the idea of sitting Shakespeare in them.
Yeah, and these lines are all pretty short. You know, a lot of them are just tum, 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 tum. And that's something you can get into the brain, even the child's brain. You know, they can handle these 4 or 5 beat lines very easily, really. Well, gosh. Oh, look at the time, Ben.
Yeah.
We are time's subjects, and time bids be gone.
Henry IV, Part 2.
Yeah, but
how do we leave all of our dear online friends?
Well, I suppose we could just say, you know, bye, goodbye. Yeah.
Nah, Shakespeare does it much better. Like when Juliet bids Romeo good night.
Oh,
parting is such sweet sorrow.
Yes, indeed it is. Indeed it is. Who do I like? I like Lepidus. Now, he's a character you probably don't know very much about. He's in Antony and Cleopatra. He's not one of the lead characters, but he bids farewell at one point, and this is what he says. Lovely lines for this smaller character. Let all the number of the stars give light to thy fair way.
Oh, all the number of the stars give light to thy fair way.
Oh,
we could just copy Duke Theseus in A Midsummer Night's Dream too. Joy, gentle friends, joy and fresh days of love accompany your hearts.
Ooh, can I say it with you?
Yeah, sure, let's say it.
Joy, gentle friends, joy and fresh days of love accompany your hearts.
Or simply,
fare you well.
Fare you well.
Fare you all well.
Well, we're not going just yet.
No. I hope there might be some questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. It was an amazing talk. Seeing both of you together in screen is just magic. It's pure magic. And I don't speak for myself. I speak for everyone here. The way that you illustrate and you speak about Shakespeare on a daily lives in a daily classroom is not only getting me passionate about the topic, but to leave us, we're going to buy the books.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Thank you.
To say so. Thanks very much.
Okay, I've got a question for you. It says,
please.
I wonder if people back at the UK, they'll use those expressions in their daily life, or are they taught or learned at school?
It is pretty standard to experience Shakespeare in school. I think he's been on the curriculum. Well, he's been on the curriculum in your day.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In my day, we had to study, I think, 2 or even 3 Shakespeare plays. These days, no. I mean, it is usually 1. There's been a bit of a change in the teaching in this country in recent years. There was a time when people said, 1 Shakespeare play is too much. Let's just do little bits from plays here and there. And then that went out of fashion because people realized that destroys the whole excitement of the story of the play as much as anything else, and the way characters develop. So these days, yes, in most curriculum contexts, you do 1 Shakespeare play, sometimes 2. And
I suppose the weird thing is that even people that hated Shakespeare or say that they didn't enjoy it and have become bankers or plumbers or have got nothing to do with the arts. And someone said this to me the other day, in a really pretty relatively normal sort of job, and was quoting line after line after line of Macbeth that he had studied 30 years ago. There's something about these works that do stay with you, even if you didn't particularly enjoy studying them.
And of course, the other thing is that you'll encounter these in everyday life in all sorts of circumstances. I'm thinking now of newspaper headlines, you know, where a headline writer will suddenly put in a quote from Shakespeare and play with it. One I was reading just the other day, and the headline said, "To diet or not to diet?" That is the question. It's all about dieting. But of course, if you don't know the play, if you don't know the quotation, you think, what a strange way to talk. But of course, most people do know that that's a famous quotation from Hamlet, to be or not to be. That is the question. And then they get the joke. And that sort of thing is part of everyday English language learning experience, it seems to me.
And then there are the phrases, like you said earlier, that that people are using that are Shakespeare's, that they don't realize are Shakespeare because they've become so commonplace. Like, I have to be cruel to be kind.
Oh, yes, or to the manner born. Word phrase.
You're being a tower of strength.
Yeah, idioms like that. Everyday idioms that you will have learnt or teach the kids. And it's Shakespeare without knowing it.
Amazing. I've got another question. How acceptable is for students to learn Shakespeare sonnets by heart? I wonder their opinions and experiences about it. What they think. What would they think?
Well, it's a practice that I've taught myself and seen taught around the world. And I think if it's approached in a nourishing way, it can be really effective. And what I mean by nourishing is if there are perhaps two parts. One is I'm going to choose a sonnet at random, and I'm going to print it out, and I'm going to give it to my students, and I'm going to tell them to learn it. And another path perhaps is finding a sonnet that really resonates with you. You know, there's nothing, I mean, you all know this, you're teachers, you spend far more time with young children than I have. Children can see through a lie quicker than anything else. And so and they'll be able to just as easily tell if you feel passionate about the sonnet that you've chosen, and if you dare to share with them why it means something to you. And you don't have to read it necessarily to them, but that also helps. And then inviting, if they're old enough, inviting them to choose from a selection of sonnets that you found, because perhaps 154 can be a bit overwhelming. It certainly can be to adults. And then there are a number of different ways of bringing the sonnet into your heart space, you know, to learn it by heart rather than just learn it by mind.
That's the phrase, isn't it? Learn it by heart.
Yeah. And one of them would be to translate it into your first language so that you understand it on a level or a cellular level. And then another great way to bring the sonnet into your body is to write it out into your own handwriting, and then to learn what you've written, and then split into groups so that perhaps if there are 12 students, then or 14 students, I should say, then every student gets one line, or perhaps in groups of 4, and every student gets 3 or 4 lines, and so that they're sharing the building of the sonnet too. But yeah, it's absolutely as you picked out, Dad. It's about not trying to infuse the sonnet up here, but try to infuse the sonnet into this.
Which is why they were written in the first place.
Which is why they were written in the first place. It's Shakespeare was said to have written his sonnets out onto parchment, and then used sugar to soak up the spare ink that would have been on the page, and so the sonnets would have sparkled in the sunlight, which is also a really lovely exercise for the classroom, writing stuff out with old ink, and then using parchment. I've even used taught children to use quills. To get a bunch of feathers and really? Sharpen the point, get some.
Have you done that?
Yeah.
Well, Ben and David, it's been amazing being with you this morning. Just let me start sharing my screen so I can.
Thank you, Lillian.
Share some announcements.
It's been a joy for us to be with you all too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The joy, I have to say, was all ours. Definitely, we learned so much about Shakespeare today. and how to use it on a daily basis. Okay, for all of us here today, you probably are wondering when will we get our certificate of attendance? You will be receiving it in less than 1 week. Yes, starting from today. Make sure that you check your spam box just in case it might go there. It's always going to be there in the inbox. And don't forget to request your virtual goodie bag. In this goodie bag, you will find extra worksheets. You can watch the recording, you can find and download the presentations that we just had with David and with Ben. And don't forget that today is this week and the following week is just one day of events of the Global Festival. It's going to go on for 15 days. So make sure that you are registered and you don't miss not even one talk. What do we have next in hand? Overcoming learner fatigue through creativity with Nick Peachy. And we have reflections on leading a global network of language schools in uncertain times. So thank you very much for assisting to this event this morning, the Global Festival. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, David. It was a pleasure being with you.
A great pleasure for us too.
All of you.
Bye for now.
Bye, teachers. Bye, everyone.